Tristyn Lee, you're one of the most year-round shredded people that I've honestly ever met. Like, you stay that way all the time. And you first came on my radar as someone that was kind of experimenting and having fun with like keto and carnivore and things like that. And it impressed me because even at a young age, you were messing around with it and your body composition is amazing. But you quit carnivore, you quit keto. And I kind of want to talk about that and what your diet looks like now and what made you quit, what made you kind of change your mind on that.
Sure. So I started keto when I was really young. I started keto when I was 13 years old, and that slowly transitioned to the carnivore diet just through ease. I was, or more so simplicity, I would say. I just found it easier to just eat meat and fish and eggs, and that's just what I enjoyed. Vegetables didn't seem to have any major impact on what I was doing. The reason why I quit the carnivore diet in particular is because I couldn't eat enough food overall to gain weight. And although I can maintain a relatively lean physique at 7, 8, 9%, I got down to extremely low, unhealthy levels of body fat, which was around the 3, 4, 5% body fat. And that wasn't allowing me to just live in general. So in order to get out of that state of being 3, 4, 5% body fat, I had to gain body fat. And to do that, I put carbohydrates back in because it was getting to a point where my digestion was thrown off by the amount of fat that I was eating through the carnivore diet. And I couldn't increase my protein further because I was having, one, a little bit of digestive issues, not too much, but more so satiety issues. Protein is just extremely satiating. So eating that much protein and fat, I got up to around 250 grams of protein and 250 grams of fat per day at 138 pounds, 140 pounds was a lot on my digestive system, and carbohydrates, mostly in the form of just white rice and sweet potato, facilitated my ability to gain the body fat that I needed in order to put on additional amounts of muscle tissue, which was my goal.
I put a link down below for 30% off your entire first order with Thrive Market. Thrive Market focuses on the ingredient quality. That's why getting 30% off your first order with them is awesome. If you go to the grocery store, the reality is you have to spend a lot of time and you need a practical PhD to really read the ingredients, to really understand and cross-reference it. Thrive Market does that already. They do not have garbage ingredients coming into the food that they have on their digital shelves, so to speak. So the reason that I trust Thrive Market is because I know that even if I'm getting something that's like a sweet treat or something that I want to enjoy that's even a snack, at least I don't have to worry about having low quality ingredients. And you can sort by different diet type. I spent a lot of time in Europe recently and I was just almost in love with the food quality there. And the thing that I like about Thrive is they do a good job of emulating the kind of food quality that's coming into the foods that they have. So that link down below gets you 30% off. It gets delivered right to your doorstep and you get a free $60 gift with any purchase. So go ahead and check them out. It's in the top line of the description underneath this video.
So there was never any like reason from a health perspective that you left, keto carnivore. It was purely like almost like staying too lean.
100%. And I think there's a fine line between like lean and exotically lean. And I think most people they look at pro bodybuilders who are on like a competitive stage and think like, wow, that looks like insane. Like it looks crazy. And then you see people on like a beach photo shoot and it's like the difference between those two things is extreme. And so to get out of that exotically lean point, which was like I said, 4%, 5% body fat, I had to eat my way out of it. But no, from like a health perspective, I honestly felt great on a carnivore diet from like a mental clarity perspective. Inflammation was zero. I was extremely productive. My energy was good, but because I wasn't building the muscle tissue that I wanted to build, because that was just one of my goals as like a fitness or an athlete in general, I decided, okay, let's make a change that's going to facilitate that growth.
Interesting. Yeah, that's. I've had similar experiences with that. It's like I almost found that staying keto carnivore. Or I was almost more ketovore, for that term. For people that don't know, that's kind of where you're kind of implementing a little bit more of dairy and things like that into a carnivore, which I guess depends, splitting hairs on what you want. But anyway, that was, a lot more my style. Probably the best I've ever felt in my life. But it was getting to a point where it's like not that I wanted to put on body fat, but I was too lean all
Yeah.
the time, and it was showing in my face a lot. And it was starting to affect my sleep. And I think that my sleep was affected not because of the diet, but my sleep was affected because of my extremely low body fat.
Yeah.
So it's like, and also having to come to grips with the fact that like I don't need to be 3, 4, 5% to be happy. Like that's a weird internal validation thing that needs to go. That needs to, and that's a mental health discussion for another day.
For sure.
But it's very similar things. It's but I want to ask you. I mean, again, we'll kind of come back to like a little more of what your diet looks like now. But like, what did you feel differently between keto and carnivore?
So I'll say my digestion was better on carnivore than it was on keto. Now, I don't know if that's because I had slowly shifted to almost an elimination approach. So because having cut out vegetables for so long, my body had adapted to that and potentially not had the mechanisms it needed to digest particular foods like particular vegetables or whatever. And I think that you can become almost comfortable not having certain things. Like, so if you're having excessive amounts of fiber or even just a little bit of fiber on a ketogenic diet, and then you go to a carnivore diet where it's essentially no fiber, as soon as you add fiber back in, it's going to be a little bit uncomfortable likely for your system. And so maybe not because of fiber being good or bad or good or bad for my digestion in particular, but just because it was an elimination approach. I hadn't had it for a long time, but keto and carnivore I felt pretty similar. I was able to get inflammation wise, I was pretty much the same. I've never had bad joint issues. I've never had bad sleep. I've never had bad breathing, any of these different things. And my mental clarity on both was fairly similar. But I'll say that with carnivore, simplicity was probably the major thing. You really can't mess it up. You only have like 3 things to pick from when it comes to food sources. It's like meat, fish, eggs. Some people will throw dairy in there. And so for me, it was more a simplicity thing than it was an overall like how I'm feeling.
I think that's what a lot of people forget too, is that it's one of the big reasons why it's so successful for people. I could go, I mean, you know me. I mean, I could go into a list of mechanistic reasons, right?
Yeah.
But I think the big thing is you're eliminating variables, and it's just like
Yeah.
it's pretty easy to maintain, and it's like easy to do when you're traveling. You can get a burger patty anywhere, and things
Sure.
like that. Before we get into like your diet, and I do want to talk a little bit more about what your diet looked like then versus what it looks like now, like a little more specifically. But I mean, would you go back to keto carnivore if you needed to get super shredded? You're already shredded to the bone, but if you needed to get paper, thin skin, super shredded again, would you? Or now that you've kind of learned how to toy with carbs and use them, you say use carbs responsibly, would you cut that way?
I think I would still continue to use carbs, maybe in a different sense. I would keep them like similar to your approach right now. I'd probably maintain my peri-workout nutrition and keep carbohydrates around my workouts, and then the remainder of the day go more so towards a moderate protein, moderate fat approach and more keto or carnivore. But I still think I would keep carbohydrates in my diet just because I have found that from an aesthetic perspective, it fills your muscles more. So you just even though like, there's arguments around, how much glycogen is depleted when you're actually doing weight training. Is it really necessary to have a certain level of glycogen from carbohydrates being stored in the cells? And so there's arguments around both sides. But having carbohydrates in your diet, having a higher baseline of carbohydrates, is going to provide a higher baseline level of glycogen likely.
Yeah.
And so if you're looking for aesthetics, filling the muscle cells as much as possible and giving you that full look that you'll see when bodybuilders are on stage, even though they're super lean, is going to have a better effect than having no carbs. You'll see like a lot of keto people, because they're forced to lower their fat down as they go into shows, they don't have that full look that someone with carbohydrates would have, because they look a little bit stringy and depleted.
Yeah, that's very fair. And I feel like it's, I would probably say a very similar thing. I think if I needed to get super, super paper thin skin lean, I would go back to a keto carnivore for most of the day with slightly lower fat than I normally would. But I would have the carbohydrates peri-workout.
Sure.
And I feel like one of the things that I think you might be inadvertently alluding to is also your glucose tolerance, your ability to utilize those carbs and put them in the right place.
For sure.
Because I think people watching that have done keto carnivore and have either slipped up or purposefully had carbs, it's like the water rebound from that and just the tolerance of those carbohydrates is terrible. Like no wonder they feel like, or I would feel this way too, like, oh, I can never have carbohydrates because here I have been keto carnivore for 6 months and I have carbohydrates and like I hold a bunch of water and I feel kind of miserable. Well, it's because you've lost glucose tolerance. So now it's like, okay, how do we find that balance of being able to utilize keto carnivore for the right times, but then still not lose all your glucose tolerance so you're able to handle glucose efficiently. And that also includes during a workout, right? So you can actually utilize the fuel properly.
For sure. Yeah, I agree. And I also think something that's probably not talked about enough is where are those carbohydrate sources coming from? Because most people will say, well, keto didn't work for me or carbohydrates didn't work for me because whenever I have carbs, I get bloated or I hold water. And it's like oftentimes it's junk that they're putting back into their diet rather than just white rice or sweet potato or things that are more likely to not like that they're more likely to have better digestion with. But if you're going out and you're having burgers and fries and you don't see the sodium associated with it, when then you have cheat meal here, cheat meal there, it's not the same thing as just adding in objectively a clean carb source. Your body's going to process it completely differently.
Yeah, and also just, every other inflammatory thing that's in there.
100%.
Usually if people, like from a caloric standpoint, if you look at French fries, like it's mostly fat. It's not mostly carbs.
Yeah, exactly. For sure.
It's like probably 50, 60% fat. Yeah. So it's like, no, like that's not a high carb food. That's a high fat food, my friend. Yeah. That's different.
Or a mixture of both, high fat, high carb, and that's that pairing together. And then people are just overeating like crazy. So.
Yep. And the nutrient partitioning. I had Dr. Nick Norwitz on. It's interesting. We talked about the kind of what is the real cause or potential cause of obesity? Is it calories or is it? And he's like, well, in a way, it's calories, but it's really improper nutrient partitioning.
Right.
It's the inability for the body to utilize nutrients appropriately.
Sure.
And if you look at this, the standard American diet is not a high carb diet. The standard American diet is a high carb, high fat diet.
Right.
More specifically, a high carb, high refined carb, high saturated fat diet.
Yeah.
What ethnicity are you?
I'm half Chinese, half Canadian.
Okay. So, clearly Chinese, Japanese eat a high carbohydrate diet, but their carb sources are generally different, or at least, they used to be. Everything's changing around the world now, right? It's all different. But it's like, if you're looking at white rice, you're looking at a pretty low calorie food. Like you're looking, it's, you look at even the old Okinawans before what it is now in Japan. It's like the same kind of thing. It's like, it's not the carbohydrates that are the problem. It's like been eating those for centuries, millenniums, but it's just the combination of the fats and carbohydrates that become a problem.
Absolutely. I think generally speaking, overeating is the issue. Yeah. And so if you're having hyperpalatable foods, that's going to lead to overeating, and anything in excess is going to cause weight gain, right? So whether it's fats or carbohydrates or proteins, there's different, like they're gonna affect your body differently, but if you're overeating any of them, you're gonna be storing body fat.
Period. Yeah.
Period.
So, what are your key staple foods now?
I'm still very particular with my diet. I'm very regimented because I only pick foods that make me feel good. So people say this is restrictive, that's restrictive. I tell them, well, these are the things that make me feel good, and these are the things that are going to benefit my performance. Anything else I don't need. I don't really treat food as an enjoyment thing. I treat food as a performance thing. And some people say that's sad, whatever, this, that, and the other. It's not where I get my enjoyment from, which is fine. We can debate on that all day. Yeah. But typically my proteins are just leaner proteins with some fattier fishes and things like that. So 93.7 beef, occasionally 85.15 beef. I'll have steak on some occasions, generally a leaner cut since I am having higher carbohydrates now. Salmon, eggs occasionally. From a carbohydrate perspective, I pretty much solely do white rice and sweet potato. Sometimes I'll do russet potatoes, things like that. And then additional fats, I'll have nuts on occasion. But that's not a primary thing in my diet. And then I'll have things like olive oil to cook any sort of like vegetable that I have. And vegetable wise, it's mostly just zucchini, occasionally asparagus, some cucumber, very simple. Yeah.
Do you so you opt for generally pretty lean sources of protein? Is that just because it's easier to account for, it's easier to control, like you're able to add your fats in a more controlled variable versus like this random juicy ribeye that might have.
Yep.
Yeah.
I think so. That's primarily what it is. I mean, when I made the shift from carnivore, like where I was having extremely high fatty like meats, like crazy high fatty steaks and super fatty steaks and stuff like that, I kind of just generally shifted to more leaner cuts. Nothing against the fattier cuts, but from a tracking perspective, it's easier to track leaner cuts than it is fattier cuts.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
One of the things I've talked about so much is like if you go for a fatty cut of steak, which is amazing and I have nothing wrong with it, it's like, if carbohydrates are in the equation, like you can still put yourself into that spot where you're high fat, high carb and just hypercaloric and
easily,
like very easily. The other thing is that like if you compare 2 ribeye steaks, like
all you have to do is look at them.
yeah, but it's like even if you have 2 ribeye steaks that have similar ribboning of fat on it,
yeah,
like you could be talking a difference of 20 grams of fat between the two and not even realize
for
it,
sure.
Right? So it's like you and I might be able to, like we could look at 2 ribeyes and be like, oh, that one's probably X amount of fat, that one's probably X amount of fat. But most people, like when you're educating on health content and fat loss content, you tell them to eat a ribeye or something like the delta between like 2 different ribeyes could be like 200 calories,
yeah,
which starts to add up. Like if they're doing that 2 or 3 times a day, or they're doing,
easily, yeah,
so then you're like all of a sudden you're looking at, okay, we're at a delta of 600 extra calories over the week, and they don't understand why they haven't lost that little bit of fat, right? So it's one of those things where it's just easier to control and easier to sort of have an idea of where you are. Whereas with something like, let me put it this way, I feel like calories are not as important when you're on keto carnivore, because I feel like you're granted a little bit of slack there. There's something going on there that they're still important, but I feel like they're a little bit less important. I know that anecdotally that like I was able to eat a lot more liberally, just protein and fat, and not really gain fat. When carbohydrates are in the equation, it's still hard for me to gain fat because I have a healthy metabolism, but definitely is easier. Mm-hmm. Now, I guess my point in saying that is that when people are transitioning from keto carnivore over to having carbs, I think what you did, even subconsciously, like not even really necessarily thinking about it, by reducing the fattier cuts of meat is probably really important, just because all of a sudden your things start to matter a little bit more. Insulin dynamics are now coming into play, whereas before they weren't really a factor.
Sure, and I think defining your goals at particular periods is important as well. At the time period of coming out of the ketogenic carnivore state, I was actively trying to gain weight anyways. So when I was putting carbohydrates in, I wasn't super concerned with an extra 200 calories there or an extra 200 calories here or whatever. But someone who is trying to create some sort of energy deficit with a diet, it's important, because if you're creating a 200 calorie deficit and you're throwing this steak in here that's 200 more calories, your deficit is now gone. Yeah. And so you're not going to get the results that you're looking for if you're thinking that you're in an energy deficit, but you're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If we talk energy deficit for a second, it's a great time to mention this. Are you a fan of more aggressive short-term deficits, or do you like longer like little?
It depends where your starting point is. I think someone who is starting from a heavier weight could potentially benefit from more aggressive starting point. Mm-hmm. Generally speaking, you are able to you have more fat to burn. Yeah. So you're able to cut a little bit harder, and you're not going to experience the same side effects as someone who's already 6% body fat is. But for me personally, what I've found works best is a pretty stable cut, nothing too aggressive and also nothing too slow, like enough that it's noticeable week over week. So for me, I do use a weight scale. I know some people don't like using a weight scale, but something that's enough to notice changes on the weight scale, but nothing so aggressive where I'm sacrificing performance in the gym.
Yeah, because you're not a big, you never have been a real big intermittent fasting guy, right? Like you've always, even when you were keto carnivore, or did you kind of mess with it then?
When I was keto carnivore, I was devout 3 meals per day. I always liked having meals around my training, and then I liked having something like later on in the day or whatever it is, because I generally trained in the morning, just because I found my appetite was still high later in the day.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's I feel like the keto or carnivore crowd is split pretty evenly, 50-50 on that. Like there's the keto carnivore crowd that just thrives with fasting because they have like no appetite, and then there's the crowd that's like, no, I want to eat my meat, I want to keep doing it. Yeah. It's all good, and I've done it both ways. When it comes to like the aggressive pulls, like okay, energy restriction a whole lot to try to get lean, I'm with you in the same boat. Like for me, I think it makes sense to do more aggressive things, like more frequent fasting when you have more fat on you. The leaner that you get, the more risky it becomes, like for muscle loss, right? Which is
For sure.
a huge thing. It's a lot easier to lose fat than it is to build muscle.
Yeah.
And it's you can always lose the fat again. It's really hard to get that muscle back.
Absolutely. Well, even in my last gaining phase, so I spent majority of the last year and a bit prior to doing a cut in a gaining phase in a dedicated surplus where I was actively trying to gain weight. That took a lot longer than 12 weeks to strip the fat, all the fat that had accumulated alongside the muscle tissue. It took a lot longer to build the muscle than it did to strip the fat off. And I think that the approach to fat loss is a lot more simplistic than people make it. They try to find ways out of it, out of like just simply lowering the amount of energy they're consuming overall and maintaining protein and maintaining their performance in the gym.
Yeah.
If you keep your performance up in the gym, if you keep your protein at an adequate amount, which there's arguments about, I guess, but I think generally 1 gram per pound of lean body weight is a pretty good marker to cover your bases, maybe a little bit higher if you're in an aggressive deficit. Like I said, you're keeping your performance up in your gym, you're hitting your protein targets, and you're generally losing weight week over week. You can be pretty confident that the muscle is being retained and you're losing body fat. And then the other thing is, do you look in the mirror and say, well, I look a little bit better today? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the thing that I'm just going to reemphasize that you said is your performance is your best barometer.
Absolutely. With everything, whether you're cutting, you're trying to lose body fat, whether you're trying to gain muscle, performance is the absolute, like that is the number one thing that you should focus on.
Yeah.
Because if you're improving week over week in the gym, you can be confident that whatever calories you're consuming are being put to good use into building muscle, regardless if there is a little bit of additional fat being accumulated at that time. And when you're dieting down, you can be confident that you're maintaining the tissue that you worked so hard in that growing phase to maintain it during the cut.
Yeah, you absolutely positively should not and do not need to be losing strength when you're cutting. Like if that's happening, you need to bump things up a little bit. That is
until you're at a stage level body fat percentage and you're dehydrating or something along those lines.
Different situation for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's a different ballgame for sure because your intracellular volume's different, leverage is different, everything's different. But
for sure,
it's I would argue that sometimes like metabolically, as you get leaner, you might even get stronger because you develop efficiencies and your system is actually like your cardio is likely better and like all these things that come into like the minor recoveries in between literal reps, not between sets, but between reps, like the ability for nutrient partitioning and proper oxidation, like you actually might very well get stronger when you're cutting.
Especially someone who's coming from a high body fat percentage or early in their training career, they will 100% make improvements in their strength if they're maintaining a good gym schedule.
I'm with you, man. Well, Tristyn, where can everyone find you?
Just Tristyn Lee across all socials.
Right on, my man. Thanks, brother.